What is a climate, and how is it characterized?
Climate refers to the long-term weather conditions of a region, based on long-term averaging of temperature. Climates often undergo cyclic changes over decades, centuries, and millennia, but it is difficult to predict future climate changes. A climate diagram summarizes seasonal variation in temperature, precipitation, length of wet/dry seasons, and portion of the year spent in specific temperature ranges. Weather and climate are important because they are the determining factors of biomes and ecosystems.
What is a wetland?
A wetland is an area that is covered by water for at least part of the year and has characteristic soils and water-tolerant plants. Examples of wetlands include swamps, marshes, bogs, and estuaries.
What is needed for DNA replication?
DNA replication is a complex process requiring more than a dozen enzymes, nucleotides, and energy. In eukaryotic cells there are multiple sites called origins of replication. At these sites, enzymes unwind a helix by breaking the double bonds between the nitrogen bases. Once the molecule is opened, separate strands are kept from rejoining by DNA stabilizing proteins. DNA polymerase molecules read the sequences in the strands being copied and catalyze the addition of complementary bases to form new strands.
Why do small animals not have a circulatory system?
Smaller animals such as hydras do not have a separate circulatory system. Since their cells are able to efficiently exchange materials, nutrients, gases, and wastes, through diffusion. The cells of these animals are close to the surface and thus can exchange nutrients effectively.
What setbacks have occurred in the use of gene therapy?
During the 1990s there were more than 4,000 patients involved in gene therapy trials. Unfortunately, most of these trials were not successful. And a further setback occurred in 1999 with the death of 18-year-old Jesse Gelsinger. Gelsinger suffered from ornithine transcarbamylase deficiency, a rare metabolic disease in which toxic levels of ammonia can be produced by the liver. He died of complications due to a severe immune response to the viral carrier used to deliver the therapeutic genes.
What is a community?
Suppose you wanted to study not just the sparrows living in your backyard but also the insects they feed to their young and the plants that those insects eat. The term used by ecologists to describe a group of populations of different species living in the same place at the same time is community. This is a concise way of describing the organisms likely to be affected by any change to the local environment.
What is the difference between a reptile and an amphibian?
Reptiles are clad in scales, shields, or plates, and their toes have claws. Amphibians have moist, glandular skins, and their toes lack claws. Reptile eggs have a thick, hard, or parchment-like shell that protects the developing embryo from moisture loss, even on dry land. The eggs of amphibians lack this protective outer covering and are always laid in water or in damp places. Young reptiles are miniature replicas of their parents in general appearance if not always in coloration and pattern. Juvenile amphibians pass through a larval, usually aquatic, stage before they metamorphose, change in form and structure, into the adult form. Reptiles include alligators, crocodiles, turtles, and snakes. Amphibians include salamanders, toads, and frogs.
What is parasitism?
Parasitism is an interaction in which one organism, the parasite, co-opts the resources of another organism, the host. By definition, the host is hurt by the association while the parasite benefits. Parasitism can be physical, like the parasitic worms found in the internal organs of animals, or social, like the brood or nest parasitism found in some birds. In these species, resident birds are tricked into incubating the 340 eggs and raising the chicks of interlopers.
How do cells eat?
Cells eat by a process known as phagocytosis, which is important to two types of cells. Amoebas, unicellular protozoans, and mammalian white blood cells, macrophages, neutrophils. Phagocytosis is very important because it provides food for the protozoan. It also plays a critical role in defense systems by eliminating microorganisms or damaged cells in mammals. Once a particle, or microorganism, is ingested, it is wrapped within a vesicle, and then the vesicle fuses with the lysosome. The digestive enzymes of the lysosome then digest the contents of the vesicles.
What is an enzyme?
Enzymes are proteins that act as biological catalysts. They decrease the amount of energy needed, activation energy, to start a metabolic reaction. Without enzymes, you would not be able to harvest energy and nutrients from your food. As an example, lactose intolerance is an inability to produce lactase. The enzyme that breaks down milk sugar, lactose. While this condition is not life-threatening for adults, it can have severe consequences for infants and children.
What was the United States' first national park?
On March 1, 1872, an act of Congress signed by Ulysses S. Grant established Yellowstone National Park as the first national park. The action inspired a worldwide national park movement.
Why do animals migrate?
Animals migrate for a variety of reasons, including climate. Too hot or too cold during part of the year, food availability, seasonal, and breeding. Some animals need a specific environment to lay eggs or give birth. Animals move between locations to take advantage of optimal environments.
What are the 4 phases of the bacterial population growth curve?
The 4 phases of the bacterial population growth curve are: lag phase, exponential phase, also called logarithmic, stationary phase, and death phase, also called decline. During the lag phase there is no increase in cell numbers. Although the bacteria are synthesizing enzymes present in their environment in preparation for the exponential phase. During the exponential or logarithmic phase, the bacterial population grows at a rate that doubles the population during the generation time. The stationary phase incurs neither an increase nor a decrease in the cell population. The population growth cannot continue at the exponential rate since the nutrient supplies have been depleted and waste products have accumulated. The final phase of the bacterial population growth curve is the death phase, during which more cells die than are replaced by new cells.
What are some typical disorders of the immune system?
Allergies, autoimmune diseases, and immunodeficiency diseases are different kinds of disorders of the immune system. Allergies are abnormal sensitivities to a substance that is harmless to many other people. Common allergens include pollen, certain foods, cosmetics, medications, fungal spores, and insect venom. The antibody immunoglobulin E, IgE, is responsible for most allergic reactions. When exposed to an allergen, IgE antibodies attach themselves to mast cells or basophils. Mast cells are normal body cells that produce histamines and other chemicals. When exposed to the same allergen at a later time, the individual may experience an allergic response when the allergen binds to the antibodies attached to mast cells, causing the cells to release histamine and other inflammatory chemicals. While most allergic reactions are expressed as a runny nose, difficulty in breathing, skin rashes and eruptions, or intestinal discomfort, a severe allergic reaction results in anaphylactic shock. Autoimmune diseases are diseases in which the immune system rejects the body's own molecules. Insulin-dependent diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, systemic lupus erythematosus, and rheumatic fever are autoimmune diseases. In contrast, in immunodeficiency diseases such as AIDS, the immune system is too weak to fight disease.
Although plants were used as medicines in the past, has their use decreased in modern times?
Approximately 25% of all prescription drugs currently used in the Western world contain ingredients derived from plants. The United States National Cancer Institute has identified 3,000 plants from which anti-cancer drugs can be or are made. Among this group are ginseng, Panax quinquefolius, Asian mayapple, Podophyllum hexandrum, Western yew, Taxus brevifolia, and rosy periwinkle. Of the 3,000 plants used for anti-cancer drugs, 70% come from rainforests, which are also a source of plants used to treat countless other diseases and infections. However, 80% of the world's population does not use prescription drugs. Rather, this group relies almost exclusively on herbal medicines. Therefore, the medicinal use of plants has not decreased.
What is Thomas Hunt Morgan's contribution to genetics?
Thomas Hunt Morgan, 1866 to 1945, won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1933 for his discovery of the role played by chromosomes in heredity. He is perhaps most noted for his fly lab at Columbia University in New York, where he collected Drosophila, fruit fly, mutants. Morgan studied fruit flies much in the same way that Mendel studied peas. He found that the inheritance of certain characteristics, such as eye color, was affected by the sex of the offspring.
What are the main components of a bacterial cell?
The major components of a bacterial cell are the plasma membrane, cell wall, and a nuclear region containing a single, circular DNA molecule. Plasmids, small circular pieces of DNA that exist independently of the bacterial chromosome, are also present in a bacterial cell. In addition, some bacteria may have flagella, which aids in movement, pili or fimbriae, which are short, hair-like appendages that help bacteria adhere to various surfaces, including the cells that they infect. Or a capsule of slime around 92, the cell wall that protects it from other microorganisms.
Why are people from certain geographic areas more likely to have different genetic traits?
Human activities can influence the distribution of alleles. Some examples include social constraints that limit choice of a mate to language, religion, and economic status, the tendency of some isolated populations, such as native island peoples, to stay isolated, and worldwide movement of populations due to technological advances. Studies have been done on the distribution of the B allele of the ABO red blood cell system. Initially, the highest occurrence of the B allele was in the indigenous populations of Central Asia. However, as people migrated from Asia into Europe, the frequency of the B allele changed, such that the highest frequency is now in Eastern Europe and lowest in Southwestern Europe.
What was the flower clock of Linnaeus?
Carolus Linnaeus, 1707 to 1778, who was responsible for the binomial nomenclature, classification system of living organisms, invented a floral clock to tell the time of day. He had observed over a number of years that certain plants constantly opened and closed their flowers at particular times of the day, these times varying from species to species. One could deduce the approximate time of day according to which species had opened or closed its flowers. Linnaeus planted a garden displaying local flowers, arranged in sequence of flowering throughout the day, that would flower even on cloudy or cold days. He called it a horologium flori or flower clock.
What are the major parts of vascular plants?
Vascular plants consist of roots, shoots, and leaves. The root system penetrates the soil and is below ground. The shoot system consists of the stem and the leaves.
What is meant by pH and why is it so important to living things?
The term pH is taken from the French phrase T puissance d hydrogen, meaning the power of hydrogen. The composition of water can be used to understand the concept of pH. Water is composed of two hydrogen atoms bonded covalently to an oxygen atom. In a solution of water, some water molecules will dissociate into the component ions, the H and ion and the O ion. In chemistry, the term equilibrium reaction is used to describe a situation in which there are an equal number of products and reactants. Water is an example of an equilibrium reaction. Water contains H2O, H+, and O at all times. It is the balance of the two ions that determines pH. When there are more H and ions than O ions, the solution is referred to as an acid. And when there are more O ions than H and ions, the solution is referred to as a base. The concentration of hydrogen ions in water influences the chemical reactions of other molecules.
How has anise been used throughout history?
The Romans brought the licorice-flavored herb anise, Pimpinella anisum, from Egypt to Europe, where they used it as payment for their taxes. It became a popular flavoring for cakes, cookies, bread, and candy.
What is the relationship between lichens and air pollution?
Lichens are extremely sensitive to pollutants in the atmosphere and can be used as bioindicators of air quality. They absorb minerals from the air, from rainwater, and directly from their substrate. Lichen growth has been used as an indicator of air pollution, especially sulfur dioxide. Pollutants are absorbed by lichens, causing the destruction of their chlorophyll, which leads to a decrease in the occurrence of photosynthesis and changes in membrane permeability. Pollutants upset the physiological balance between the fungus and the alga or cyanobacterium, and degradation or destruction of the lichens results. Lichens are generally absent in and around cities, even though suitable substrates exist. The reason for this is the polluted exhaust from automobiles and industrial activity. They are beginning to disappear from national parks and other relatively remote areas that are becoming increasingly contaminated by industrial pollution. The return of lichens to an area frequently indicates a reduction in air pollution.
Since fungi lack the chlorophyll necessary to produce their own food, how do they obtain food?
Fungi are saprobes that absorb nutrients from waste and dead organisms. Instead of taking food inside its body and then digesting it, as an animal would, a fungus digests food outside its body by secreting strong, hydrolytic enzymes onto the food. In this way, complex organic compounds are broken down into simpler compounds that a fungus can absorb through the cell wall and cell membrane.
How do bats hunt?
Bats hunt a variety of prey. Some bats are insectivores, capable of catching their prey on the wing. Vampire bats hunt for large, slow-moving organisms to use for sustenance. Frugivorous or fruit-eating bats are adapted to finding ripe fruit distributed throughout the forest. Depending on the food type, bats may rely on their sight and or echolocation to find their prey. In echolocation, bats emit ultrasonic sounds that bounce off the objects around them. These signals are fielded by the specialized folds of flesh on the face and around the ears, allowing the bat to judge the direction and distance of objects.
What is an organ system?
An organ system is a group of organs working together to perform a vital body function. Vertebrate animals have 12 major organ systems.
How does the number of stomata on the epidermis of leaves compare among various species?
There is great variation among species in the number of stomata on the upper and lower epidermis of leaves. Horizontally oriented leaves usually have more stomata on the protected lower side of the epidermis than on the exposed upper side. Conversely, in vertically oriented leaves there are usually similar numbers of stomata on the lower and upper sides of the epidermis. The following chart shows average number of stomata per square centimeter for several different species.
What property makes skunk cabbage unique?
Skunk cabbage, Spathymophytitis, blooms while there is still snow on the ground. The root of the plant acts like a metabolic furnace, providing heat to the flowering shoot. It melts the surrounding snow as it pushes up through the frozen ground. Plant botanists have been unable to identify the cause of this phenomenon. Different theories have been proposed, with some experts believing it is a special adaptation for the cold weather climate and others speculating that it is an evolutionary remnant of a feature of a tropical plant.
What was the first mammal to be successfully cloned?
The first mammal cloned from adult cells was Dolly, a ewe born in July 1996. Dolly was born in a research facility in Scotland. Ian Wilmut, 1944, led the team of biologists that removed a nucleus from a mammary cell of an adult ewe and transplanted it into an enucleated egg extracted from a second ewe. Electrical pulses were administered to fuse the nucleus with its new host. When the egg began to divide and develop into an embryo, it was transplanted into a surrogate mother ewe. Dolly was the genetic twin of the ewe that donated the mammary cell nucleus. On April 13, 1998, Dolly gave birth to Bonnie, the product of a normal mating between Dolly and a Welsh mountain ram. This event demonstrates that Dolly was a healthy, fertile sheep, able to produce healthy offspring.
Can animals use tools?
A tool can be defined as any object used by an animal to perform a specific task. Chimpanzees carefully select twigs that they then prepare as probes to fish out termites from mounds. Sea otters use rocks to crack open clam shells. Birds will drop clams onto rocks to crack their shells. Japanese macaques use the sea to wash sand off food items.
Do animals have friends?
Animals do form social attachments, friends, among their peers. For example, among savanna baboons, bonds between males and females are a central feature of a society. Behaviors like allogrooming, grooming another animal, and reciprocal altruism. Helping another animal, allow unrelated animals to form enduring bonds.
What is the light source for a spectrophotometer?
Most commonly, a spectrophotometer uses white light as its light source. White light is a combination of all visible wavelengths. Ultraviolet and infrared wavelengths may also be used.
How does the mark recapture method estimate a wildlife population?
Researchers set traps to capture a population sampling in a given area. The captured animals are marked, or tagged, and then released. After a certain amount of time the traps are set again. The second time, both marked and unmarked animals will be captured. The proportion of marked to unmarked animals gives an estimate of the size of the entire population. The equation used to estimate the number of individuals in the population is marked individuals x total catch second time n equals recaptured marked individuals, where n is the number of individuals in the population. A disadvantage of this method is that it assumes that a marked individual has the same chance of being trapped as an unmarked individual. Individuals that were trapped once may be wary of traps. Or they may seek traps since they have learned that traps provide food.
What books did Darwin publish?
Journal of Researches into the Geology and Natural History of the Various Countries Visited by HMS Beagle under the command of Capt. Fitzroy, R.N., from 1832 to 1836, 1839, Geological Observations on Coral Reefs, Volcanic Islands, and on South America, being the Geology of the Voyage of the Beagle, under the command of Capt. Fitzroy, during the years 1832 to 36, 1846, a monograph on the subclass Cirripedia. 1851 to 1854, a monograph on the fossil Lepodidae, or pedunculated cirripedes of Great Britain. 1851, a monograph on the fossil Balanidae and Verucidae of Great Britain. 1854, on the origin of species by means of natural selection, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. 1859, on the various contrivances by which British and foreign orchids are fertilized by insects, and on the good effects of intercrossing. 1861, the movements and habits of climbing plants. 1865, the variation of animals and plants under domestication. 1868, the descent of man, and selection in relation to sex. 1871, the expression of the emotions in man and animals. 1872, insectivorous plants. 1876, the effects of cross and self. Fertilization in the vegetable kingdom. 1876, the different forms of flowers on plants of the same species. 1877, the power of movement in plants. 1880, the formation of vegetable mold, through the action of worms. With observations on their habits. 1881, the movements and habits of climbing plants. 1882.
What is a chemical bond?
A chemical bond is an attraction between the electrons present in the outermost energy level or shell of a particular atom. This outermost energy level is known as the valence shell. Atoms with an unfilled outer shell are less stable and tend to share, accept, or donate electrons. When this happens, a chemical bond is formed. In living systems, chemical reactions, supervised by enzymes, link atoms together to form molecules.
What are the two major types of vesicles in eukaryotic cells?
Vesicles are small, intracellular membrane sacs usually formed from the Golgi apparatus. Lysosomes and microbodies are examples of vesicles found in eukaryotic cells.
Who was Ernst Haeckel?
Ernst Haeckel, 1834 to 1919, was a physician who became a fervent evolutionist after reading on the origin of species. Although he differed with Charles Darwin over natural selection as the primary mode of evolution. Haeckel is best known for his attempts to tie the stages of development to the stages of evolution. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. He thought that each stage of the developmental process was a depiction of an evolutionary ancestor. Haeckel is also credited with coining the terms phylum, phylogeny, and ecology.
Why do animals that are round tend to show only very simple behaviors?
Examples of round animals include members of the phylum Cnidaria, hydras, jellyfishes, corals, and phylum Echinodermata, starfishes, sea urchins, sand dollars. An animal with radial symmetry usually has a nerve net that only allows very simple types of behavior. Animals that are round are usually sessile, i.e., non-moving. This is in contrast to animals that display bilateral symmetry, in which there is a distinct head/tail and in which the animals can be divided into different planes. Bilaterally symmetrical animals usually move in a specific direction.
What is sociobiology?
Sociobiology, which is considered by some as a subdiscipline of behavioral ecology, is the study of the social organization of a species. Sociobiology attempts to develop rules that explain the evolution of certain social systems.
What were the Beagle voyages?
The HMS Beagle was a naval survey ship that left England in December 1831 to chart the coastal waters of Patagonia, Peru, and Chile. On a voyage that would last 5 years, Darwin's job as unpaid companion to the captain on board the Beagle allowed him to satisfy his interests in natural history. On its way to Asia, the ship spent time in the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador. Darwin's observations there caused him to generate his theory of natural selection.
Which group of animals has exceptionally well-developed brown fat?
Mammalian hibernators have exceptionally well-developed brown fat. Some scientists even refer to it as the hibernation gland. The supply of brown fat is used during the winter months when the animal hibernates and is built up during the spring and summer. Brown fat is important in the revarming process that the animal undergoes after hibernation.
How are plant cells able to use light to produce sugars?
Plant cells use chloroplasts to convert light energy to chemical energy, sugar. These chloroplasts, which are likely to have originated as free-living bacteria, use the energy contained in UV radiation to raise electrons to higher energy states through the process of photosynthesis. The energized electrons are used to build and rearrange a number of different molecules. Some of these eventually become glucose, which in turn can be used to produce sucrose, also known as table sugar.
What is divergent evolution?
when two species move away from the traits that they share with a common ancestor. As they adapt to their own environments, the result is called divergent evolution. As an example, imagine the diversity among bird species. Ducks, hummingbirds, ostriches, and penguins are all descended from an ancestral bird species. Yet they have all diverged as they adapted to their particular environments.
What is a homeobox gene?
The homeobox is specific subset of nucleotides in homeotic genes that have important roles in embryonic development. Homeotic genes code for proteins that act as transcription factor, enhancing the rate at which certain DNA sequences are transcribed. The similarity of the sequence in different groups of species is another indication of the shared evolutionary history of species.
What happens if a cell's DNA is mutated?
DNA contains the code for building everything within the cell. If the DNA code is changed, or mutated, the cell will build things differently. Mutations can change the way that a cell produces substances, such as proteins and carbohydrates, builds organelles, or responds to messages. These changes can enhance a cell's ability to survive, although it is more likely that drastic changes will result in a decrease of efficiency or even the death of the cell.
Which club moss is threatened with extinction?
Many club mosses are attractive plants often used as Christmas decorations or in floral wreaths. The species Lycopodium nutans, which is native to Hawaii and is commonly known as Verweioie, is threatened with extinction and has been placed on the endangered species list.
What is the hydrologic cycle?
The hydrologic cycle takes place in the hydrosphere, which is the region containing all the water in the atmosphere and the Earth's surface. It involves 5 phases: condensation, infiltration, runoff, evaporation, and precipitation.
What is cell culture?
Cell culture is the cultivation of cells, outside the body, from a multicellular organism. This technique is very important to biotechnology processes because most research programs depend on the ability to grow cells outside the parent animal. Cells grown in culture usually require very special conditions, e.g., specific pH, temperature, nutrients, and growth factors. Cells can be grown in a variety of containers, ranging from a simple petri dish to large-scale cultures in roller bottles, which are bottles that are rolled gently to keep culture medium flowing over the cells.
Where are viruses found?
Viruses lie dormant in any environment, land, soil, air, and on any material. They infect every type of cell, plant, animal, bacterial, and fungal.
What is imprinting?
Imprinting occurs when an animal learns to make a response to a particular animal or object. Usually the behavior is learned by a young animal through exposure to a stimulus early in its development. There are two types of imprinting: filial, social attachment, and sexual. Perhaps the most famous example of imprinting is that of Konrad Lorenz, 1903 to 1989. And the Goslings who imprinted him as their mother and followed him in a classic example of filial imprinting.
How many different organisms have been identified by biologists?
Approximately 1.5 million different species of microorganisms, plants, and animals have been described and formally named. Some biologists believe this is only a fraction of species that exist, estimating that there are more than 10 million species waiting to be discovered, classified, and named. It is estimated that 15% of all species are marine organisms. Most scientists agree that only 5% of bacteria, fungi, nematode, and mite species have been discovered.
What is the importance of the rainforest?
Half of all medicines prescribed worldwide are originally derived from wild products. And the United States National Cancer Institute has identified more than 2,000 tropical rainforest plants with the potential to fight cancer. Rubber, timber, gums, resins, and waxes, pesticides, lubricants, nuts and fruits, flavorings and dyes, tufts, steroids, latexes, essential and edible oils, and bamboo are among the products that would be drastically affected by the depletion of the tropical forests.
Can unfertilized eggs function like other cells in the body?
A human egg is about 2,000 times the size of a sperm and has all the organelles and proteins required of a living cell, but only 1/2 of the necessary DNA. Because of this, the egg cannot be considered a functional cell. Without fertilization, human egg cells survive about 24 hours after ovulation. Prior to that, the egg is maintained by the support structures known as follicular cells, which transfer nutrients to the egg. However, in a process called parthenogenesis, an egg can develop without being fertilized. This type of fertilization occurs in rotifers, aphids, and whip-tailed lizards.
What is the law of segregation?
This principle, which Mendel discovered, predicts the transmission of a single trait. When a gamete is produced, the two copies of a particular gene, alleles, separate during its formation. For example, if a pea plant has the genetic makeup of RR, where R is round and R is wrinkled, then half the gametes will contain R and the other half R. The law of segregation comes into play during meiosis when an organism decreases its chromosome number by half when forming egg or sperm.
What is an isotope?
Atoms of an element that have different numbers of neutrons are isotopes of the same element. Isotopes of an element have the same atomic number but different mass numbers. Common examples are the isotopes of carbon, 12C and 14C. 12C has 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 6 neutrons, while 14C has 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 8 neutrons. Some isotopes are physically stable, while others, known as radioisotopes, are unstable. Radioisotopes undergo radioactive decay, emitting both particles and energy. If the decay leads to a change in the number of protons, the atomic number changes, transforming the isotopes into a different element.
What is the structure of a virus?
Viruses consist of strands of the genetic material nucleic acid, the basis of a genome, which is surrounded by a protein coat called a capsid. The capsid protects the genome and gives the virus its shape. Viruses may be either helical or icosahedral. Some viruses display a combination of helical and icosahedral symmetry, known as complex symmetry. The capsid is often subdivided into individual protein subunits called capsomers. The organization of the capsomers yields the symmetry of the virus. Animal viruses often form an envelope around the capsid. This envelope is rich in proteins, lipids, and glycoprotein molecules.
From where do frankincense and myrrh originate?
Frankincense is an aromatic gum resin obtained by tapping the trunks of trees belonging to the genus Boswellia. The milky resin hardens when exposed to the air. forming irregularly shaped granules, the form in which frankincense is usually marketed and sold. Also called olibanum, frankincense is used as an ingredient in many different products, including pharmaceuticals, perfumes, fixatives, fumigants, and incense. Myrrh comes from a tree of the genus Commiphora, native to the northeastern region of Africa and the Middle East. Myrrh is also a resin obtained from trees. It is used in pharmaceuticals, perfumes, and toothpastes.
What is apical dominance?
Apical dominance is a phenomenon in which the terminal bud produces hormones inhibiting the growth of axillary buds. This allows the plant to grow taller, increasing its exposure to light. Under certain conditions, the axillary buds begin to grow, producing branches. When the terminal bud is pruned, pinched back, on houseplants and fruit trees, axillary bud growth is stimulated, producing bushy, full-looking plants.
What antidote is available for mushroom poisoning?
No effective antidote for mushroom poisoning in humans has been discovered. The 138 toxins produced by mushrooms accumulate in the liver and lead to irreversible liver damage. Unfortunately, there may be no indication of poisoning for several hours after ingesting a toxic mushroom. When the symptoms do present, they often resemble typical food poisoning. Liver failure becomes apparent 3 to 6 days after ingesting a poisonous mushroom. Oftentimes a liver transplant may be the only possible form of treatment.
What is ethology?
Ethology emerged in the mid-1930s and was first recognized as a subdiscipline of biology in Europe. Ethology differed from traditional biological studies of animals in that scientific principles were applied to the study of animal behavior, with practitioners using both field observations and laboratory experiments. The field was developed and first recognized as a science in Europe, where experimental conditions were kept as natural as possible.
How did the introduction of the potato to Europe lead to a devastating famine in Ireland?
The white potato, Solanum tuberosum, native to South America, was first introduced to Spain in the middle of the 16th century. It was not widely accepted as a food crop since European relatives of the potato, such as nightshade, mandrake, and henbane, were known to be poisonous or hallucinogenic. In fact, all of the above-ground parts of a potato plant are poisonous and only the tuber is edible. The potato was established as a food crop in Ireland as early as 1625 and became a staple of the diet. especially among the poor, during the 18th and early 19th centuries. The widespread dependence on potatoes as a main source of food led to massive starvation. When the plant pathogen Phytophthora infestans destroyed potato fields in the 1840s, over 1 million Irish people died from starvation or subsequent disease. Another 1.5 million emigrated from Ireland.
What are the most common tapeworm infections in humans?
Tapeworms, members of the class Cestida, have long, flat bodies in which there is a linear series of sets of reproductive organs. Each set or segment is called a proglottid.
Who discovered bee dancing?
Bee dancing was studied by Carl von Frisch, 1886 to 1982, and colleagues in the 1940s. Details and interpretation of the dance language were published. In the 1967 book The Dance Language and Orientation of Bees, von Frisch was able to study a group of bees by replacing one of the walls of a hive with glass.
What are the differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells?
Eukaryotic cells are much more complex than prokaryotic cells. Having compartmentalized interiors and membrane-bound organelles within their cytoplasm. The major feature of a eukaryotic cell is its membrane-bound nucleus, which compartmentalizes the activities of the genetic information from other types of cellular metabolism. Generalized prokaryotic cell.
What is the controversy surrounding the midwife toad?
During the 1920s, an Austrian biologist, Paul Kammerer, 1880 to 1926, rose to prominence with claims that he had been able to demonstrate Lamarckian evolution, that is the inheritance of acquired characteristics. Kammerer had bred midwife toads, a land-breeding species, in water-filled aquaria for generations and reported that the toads had acquired the same structures that water-breeding toads use to hold onto each other. When Kammerer's toads were examined, they were found to have been injected with dye to mimic the pads found on the water-breeding toad species. Although Kammerer insisted that he was innocent, his reputation was ruined, and he committed suicide shortly thereafter.
Why is it necessary to fix a biological specimen?
Fixing a biological specimen retains a reasonably good semblance of the object as it appeared when it was alive. It allows the scientists to observe details of the external and internal anatomy of the specimen.
What are homologous chromosomes?
In diploid organisms, chromosomes occur in matching pairs, with the exception of the sex chromosomes. Not all organisms are diploid. For example, bacteria have only one circular chromosome. And some insects may have an odd number of chromosomes. Every human somatic cell, excluding egg or sperm cells, has 46 chromosomes, 22 somatic chromosome pairs and one sex chromosome pair. The somatic chromosome pairs, called homologous chromosomes, carry the same sequence of genes for the same inherited characteristics.
Who first developed the modern technique for the isolation of cell parts?
Robert R. Bensley, 1867–1956, and Norman Lewis Hoare, 1902–1958, disrupted the liver cells in a guinea pig and isolated mitochondria in 1934. Between 1938 and 1946, Albert Claude, 1899–1983, continued the work of Bensley and Hoare and isolated two fractions, a heavier fraction consisting of mitochondria and another fraction of lighter submicroscopic granules, which he called microsomes. Further developments led to the development of centrifugal techniques of cell fractionation commonly used now. The development of this procedure was one of the earliest examples of differential centrifugation. It initiated the era of modern experimental cell biology.
Who was Rachel Carson?
Rachel Carson, 1907–1964, was one of the first to describe to the general public the consequences of chemical contamination in the environment. In her book Silent Spring, published in 1962, Carson exposed the dangers of hydrocarbons, particularly DDT, to the reproduction of species that prey upon the insects for whom the pesticide was intended.
What is the nervous system?
The nervous system is an intricately organized, interconnected system of nerve cells that relays messages to and from the brain and spinal cord of an organism in vertebrates. It receives sensory input, processes the input, and then sends messages to the tissues and organs for an appropriate response. In vertebrates there are two parts to the nervous system: 1, the central nervous system, consisting of the brain and spinal cord, and 2, the peripheral system, consisting of nerves that carry signals to and from the central nervous system.
What is the largest terrestrial mammal in North America?
The bison, is the largest terrestrial mammal in North America. It weighs 3,100 pounds 1,406 kilograms and is 6 feet 1.8 meters high.
Which plant has the deepest root system?
Roots of the desert shrub mesquite, Prosope juliflora, have been found growing nearly 175 feet 53.5 meters deep near Tucson, Arizona.
What are the major achievements of biotechnology in the 20th century?
Date Discovery 1968 Stanley Cohen, 1922, uses plasmids to transfer antibiotic. Resistance to bacterial cells 1970 Herb Boyer, 1936. Discovers that certain bacteria can restrict some bacteriophages by producing enzymes, restriction enzymes. Isolates EcoRI 1972 Paul Berg, 1926, splices together DNA from the SV40 virus NA. Coley, making recombinant DNA, shares 1980 Nobel Prize with Walter Gilbert, 1932, and Fred Sanger. 1918, 1974 Stanley Cohen, 1922, Annie Chang, and Herb Boyer, 1936, splice frog DNA into E. coli, producing the first recombinant organism 1975 DNA sequencing developed by Walter Gilbert. 1932, Alan Maxim, 1952, and Fred Sanger, 1918, 1978 human insulin cloned in E. coli by biotech company Genentech 1986 Kary Mullis, 1944, develops the polymerase chain reaction, PCR, in which DNA polymerase can copy a DNA segment many times in a short period of time. 1989 Human Genome Project. HGP, begins 1990 Researchers at National Institutes of Health, NIH, use gene therapy to treat a human patient. 1994 Introduction of first transgenic food, the Flavor Savor tomato. 1996 Dolly is cloned by Ian Wilmut. 1944, 1997 First human artificial chromosome is developed. 2000 Completion of the first working draft, 90% complete. Of the HGP 2003 Glawfish, the first genetically modified pets are marketed and sold in the U.S.
In addition, rainforests. When was the symbol of Smokey Bear first used to encourage forest fire prevention?
The origin of Smokey Bear can be traced to World War II, when the U.S. Forest Service, concerned about maintaining a steady lumber supply for the war effort, wished to educate the public about the dangers of forest fires. They sought volunteer advertising support from the War Advertising Council. And on August 9, 1944, Albert Steele, a noted illustrator of animals, created Smokey Bear. Since 1944, Smokey Bear has been a national symbol of forest fire prevention not only in America, but also in Canada and Mexico, where he is known as Simon in both countries. This public service advertising, PSA, campaign is the longest-running PSA campaign in U.S. history. In 1947, a Los Angeles advertising agency coined the slogan "Only you can prevent forest fires." On April 23, 2001, after more than 50 years, the famous ad slogan was revised to "Only you can prevent wildfires." In response to the wildfire outbreaks during 2000, the campaign gained a living mascot in 1950 when a firefighting crew rescued a male bear cub from a forest fire in the Capitol Mountains of New Mexico. Sent to the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., to become Smokey Bear. The animal was a living symbol of forest fire protection until his death in 1976. His remains are buried at the Smokey Bear State Historical Park in Capitan, New Mexico.
How many eggs are produced by sea urchins?
The number of eggs produced by sea urchins is enormous. It has been estimated that a female of the genus Arbacia contains about 8 million eggs. In the much larger genus Echinus, the number reaches 20 million.